Hello everyone. My name is Rajiv Radhakrishnan and I am a Senior Technical Support Analyst at BMC Software. Today I will be presenting this webinar regarding the server thresholds feature in TrueSight Operations Management. Here is the agenda for today's webinar. We will start with an overview about server thresholds and how to configure them, then moving on to troubleshooting, known issues, and what are the best practices to follow when using server thresholds. Starting with the overview. Server thresholds, also known as instance thresholds, is a combination of key performance indicators, threshold types, and baselines, based on which an event is generated in TrueSight whenever there is a breach in the monitoring of an instance. They are commonly used to configure a threshold for a specific monitor instance on a specific device. It is also used to override an existing global threshold configured for a specific monitor instance. Configuration of a server threshold is done via infrastructure policies in the TrueSight presentation server. I will now provide a demonstration regarding this. This is my TrueSight presentation server console, and here under the Linux monitoring, we can see a critical global threshold configured on the used memory attribute for a value of 11,000, which means if the used memory attribute breaches the 11,000 threshold value mark, a critical alarm event should be generated. We can verify whether this threshold has been successfully applied on the instance by checking the specific monitored device. For example, this is one of the Linux devices being monitored. Here we will expand to the monitor instance named memory. In the performance graph, we need to change the graph type to single metric analysis, change the metric and select used memory, and click on the critical absolute threshold checkbox to verify what is the value reflecting for this threshold for this instance. As we can see, the 11,000 critical threshold has been successfully applied on this particular instance. In the same way, on my other two Linux devices, the same threshold mark is visible, which is reflecting from the global threshold settings. Now let's say only for these three Linux devices, I would like to be alerted if the used memory value breaches the mark of 9,000. To achieve this, we need to create a server threshold via infrastructure policy to override the existing global threshold value. So under configuration, we go to infrastructure policies, create or edit an existing policy. Under the agent selection criteria, we need to specify the name of the agents that are monitoring those devices. In my current scenario, I have the one patrol agent monitoring all the three Linux devices remotely. So I will be specifying just the one agent name under the policy condition. Then under the server threshold tab, we will add the server threshold to be configured. Select the monitoring solution, type, and attribute. Now we need to specify the monitor instance name, for which we need to refer to the instance graph. The monitor name that we need to use in the policy is specified over here. Please note that this name is case sensitive and we need to provide it as it is in the policy. If not, the server threshold will fail to get applied. If the name is too long or has special characters or spaces, then you can use the regular expression, also known as the regex pattern, to specify the instance name. For example, here the dot star specifies that threshold should apply to any monitor instance name that ends with memory. Let's configure the value to 9000 and the severity to critical. Now the policy has been updated, and we can then verify the graph of those devices to see if the new threshold is reflecting. As we can see, the server threshold has overridden the default global threshold, and now the critical threshold value is set to 9000. The same we can see for the other two devices as well. Now let's consider a scenario where I would like to configure this 9000 critical threshold value for just one of the three Linux devices that's currently being monitored, and the other two should take the critical threshold value configured at the global threshold level. To achieve this, in the infrastructure policy, when configuring the server threshold, we need to specify that device name prior to the name of the monitor instance. Please note, the device name is also case sensitive, so it needs to be provided as it is seen under the associated device section of the monitor instance graph. The device name and the monitor instance name has to be separated by a /. Also, the associate with a device checkbox needs to be selected to confirm that this threshold will apply to this specific device only. Now that the policy has been updated, let's verify what is the critical threshold visible for the memory instance of all these three Linux devices. Since this is the device that we specified the server threshold, this should still reflect as 9000, which is as expected. For the other two devices, we can see that the threshold has changed back to 11,000, which is as configured on the global threshold level. Now we move to the troubleshooting section. Debugs can be enabled on the CMA, CMA audit, and policy engine loggers on the TSPS and on the JServer process on the TSIM components. The debug messages can be found in the CMA and CMA audit log files on the TSPS and the JServer, TrueSight, and message service JS log files on the TSIM. The PW threshold and the PW report threshold commands can be used to generate a list of the applied global and server thresholds. These commands will retrieve the details of the applied thresholds directly from the TSIM database, and this can be used to confirm if any specific threshold is missing or not applied. Let me quickly demonstrate how to perform an end-to-end debug for server thresholds. Here we can see that we have already enabled the required debugs on the TSPS as well as on the TSIM servers. Post that, once the infrastructure policy for the server threshold has been created, changed, or enabled, we would be able to see these messages in the tspscma.log file, where it clearly specifies that the CMA is sending the threshold configuration to the TSIM server. And we can also see the threshold value of 9,000 that is being forwarded to the TSIM server. Now on the TSIM, we would be able to see the messages in the TrueSight.log file where it has received the response from the TSPS to create the threshold. We can also see the threshold value passed forward from the TSPS to the TSIM. We would be able to see messages related to started processing threshold, creating absolute threshold, and then it refreshes the cache for the threshold to take effect. In any point, if the threshold fails to apply, we would be able to see the respective error messages in one of the specific logs to debug the problem.
For example, let's say in the infrastructure policy, under the monitor instance name, I provide just a single character star, which is an incorrect regex pattern. Now I'll save the policy, and then when I look into the TSIM debug logs, under the TrueSight.log, we should be able to see an error message related to the incorrect regex used.
Known issues. One of the commonly seen issues is related to stale thresholds in the TSIM database, which causes new server thresholds to not apply on any monitor instance. We can identify if there are stale thresholds in TSIM database with a simple use case. When a server threshold is configured via policy, but it is not visible when checking the monitor instance graph, we need to immediately check the tsim TrueSight.log file and verify if this highlighted error is received. If yes, that confirms there are stale thresholds in the TSIM database. To fix this, we need to stop the TSIM services and run these following 3 queries to delete those stale thresholds from the database. Detailed steps are specified in this knowledge article. Also, this article does provide a permanent fix for this issue where the attached daily job file needs to be used to replace the existing one on the TSIM server so that the stale thresholds are cleared from the database on a daily basis. Detailed steps on how to implement the permanent fix are also provided in the same article. Link to this knowledge article is provided in the references section. Another known issue is where one specific server threshold value is configured in the infrastructure policy, but in the monitor instance graph, a different value is reflecting. This usually occurs if we have 2 infrastructure policies configured for server threshold for the same monitor instance and same device. In these cases, the policy with the least precedence value will get the higher priority, and hence that specific server threshold value will apply on the monitor instance. The third known issue is where no global threshold or server thresholds have been configured for a specific monitor instance in TSPS, but still incorrect alerts of threshold breach are received for that specific instance. This usually occurs if the threshold has been configured directly in the TSIM using the old Flash-based TSOM web console, specifically in TSOM versions 11.303 and older. Due to Flash deprecation, the TSOM web console is no longer available from versions 11.304 and above. However, the server thresholds configuration page is still available for troubleshooting purposes. Let me quickly demonstrate to you how this page looks in the TSIM. As we can see, we have absolute and signature thresholds that can be configured on this page at global and instance levels, and we can easily edit the threshold for any specific monitor type and for a specific device. And if you can see that there is a threshold that is enabled over here but not reflecting in the TSPS, they can be easily disabled by just unchecking the specific box. Please note that this page is made available only for troubleshooting purposes and should not be used as an alternative to configure thresholds, because thresholds configured directly on this page does not sync back to the TSPS, and hence this causes various sync and performance related issues between the TSPS and TSIM components. Best practices when using regex to configure server thresholds. Try to keep the regex as simple and accurate as possible. Focus more on the monitor name and other unique values in the name, specifically when the name contains special characters or spaces. Server name is case sensitive when specified for the associated with the device option. Regex cannot be used for the server name, and hence the server name has to be provided in full, followed by a / and then the monitor instance name, for which a regex can be used. To understand and test the format of the regex you would like to use for a specific monitor instance, do make use of utilities that are available online, such as regex101.com. These references links can help to understand how to configure server thresholds and how to troubleshoot various issues related to them. To quickly summarize our webinar today, we had a look at how to configure server thresholds, troubleshoot issues related to the same, some of the known issues that we have seen related to server thresholds, and what are the best practices on how to use regex when configuring server thresholds. This concludes my presentation.